Welcome, everyone. For those of you who are new, we use headphones and we listen to a soundtrack at the end, purpose of which is to create a brain entrainment link of our brainwaves all together as a giant group for the purpose of aligning and synchronizing consciousness, for the purpose of shifting things at a quantum field, with intention, with sort of policing deep mind under the hood, with managing my expectation about what reality can be. Reality can be changed if you can reach the deep enough place in the quantum field, and there's power in numbers. So if we can scientifically align people's consciousness precisely by entraining everyone's brainwaves to precisely and exactly the same place using brainwave entrainment, then it's possible to accomplish a change in the quantum field, a change of reality itself. So from one standpoint, we know this to be true just from quantum physics and how quantum physics statements by Nobel Prize-winning physicists today who talk about this stuff seem to align precisely word for word with ancient texts from India in Sanskrit, almost 4,000-year-old texts from the Sutras of Patanjali, who talk about exactly the same thing. Theoretically, it should work. And since nobody's putting it to the test, I decided to put it to the test. So it's a grand experiment to see if we can change reality. I have to say that since we've been doing this for over a year and a half now, my life is exploding. Unbelievable things, synchronicities, old friends showing up, or just the people I need to have right now, on and on. It's pretty amazing. And because of this concept that we've talked about in the past of quantum entanglement, as soon as we come together in any way, shape, or form, we are now entangled together in a quantum way, and that whatever happens to one of us influences the entire group. So if my world is exploding, then yours must be exploding too, or it's coming soon to a theater near you, so strap yourself in. It's exciting and amazing, but your schedule now goes like this. This here is where you can get the soundtrack from today, except that is the wrong one. There seems to be kind of a strange thing happening where I put it in the morning and it's not here during the broadcast. So I'm going to find it. It's Cosmic Chaos. There we go. scientificsounds.com/cosmic chaos is the soundtrack for today. We give these soundtracks away every week. Make sure that you download this and save it, because at the end of the week it will be replaced by the next one, never to be seen again. Many people in this group are listening to these soundtracks every single day with headphones. They last about 15 minutes. This is where you can go to ask a question about anything we cover in these soundtracks, in these live streams. Feel free to ask or make comments. scientificsounds.com/ask-a-question. And here is where you can go to get a view of all the live streams I've done up to this point, and I've lost count. I think we're up to close to number 80. That means I've given away 80 15-minute soundtracks for free. For those of you who have been with me since the beginning, you have quite a collection at this point. https bit.ly Dr. Thompson Live. Pay attention to the capital letters here, D, T, and L. So we're talking about chaos. And now I'm talking to a group who are well-versed and experts in what I'm talking about, because our lives have all been filled with chaos since the pandemic happened and the world shut down and all of us were forced to stay home and businesses closed and we had to reinvent ourselves online and on and on and on and on. Chaos everywhere. So we'll be discussing all of that. I mean, the sort of, topics that I cover here, like today, cosmic chaos. There's nothing small in these talks, It's not like we're just sitting back, talking about the weather. Except I am going to be talking about the weather today. Weather and chaos and turbulence and we're talking about the weather today. So by the way, here's my website, scientificsounds.com, and you should go and check things out. I do have workshops that come up every once in a while. I have day-long workshops on various things that have to do with sound and consciousness. And I have practitioner training, where I train people in the sound healing techniques that I do, biotuning. Today we're talking about the tangled mess of chaos. I have a big, behind me over here, I have a very large wicker basket with a wicker lid. It's a big thing. It's a large box made of wicker. And in that box is a collection of all the miscellaneous types of cables that tend to accumulate to musician, sound engineer. I'm surrounded by keyboards. This is my recording studio is here. 1,000 wires everywhere, snaking around behind unseen zones that you would never want to go and poke with a stick. But all the excess cables and stuff, and extension cords, and microphone cables, and this and that, and MIDI cables, and all go into a box. And that box, when you go in, they're all carefully laid in there. But it seems that when you go find one, the entire thing has turned into something that looks like this. It's one massive, gigantic, unbelievable, tangled mess that you just don't want to even go. Eventually, if you want a cable, you don't even open the box. You go buy the cable, because it would take longer to find the cable in there and untangle it than to drive down to the store and buy a new one. But there's actually a law of physics that governs this idea of why things tangle. They have a propensity to want to tangle and become chaotic. There's a law, a physics law about that. This concept of chaos theory, the idea that things want to disseminate themselves from order to disorder, started by this guy, Edward Norton Lorenz. Chaos theory was introduced to the modern world by Edward Norton Lorenz, famous American meteorologist. You remember I said we were going to be talking about the weather. Way back in 1972. So he's a meteorologist. He's studying weather patterns and the jet stream and ocean currents and temperature gradients between, the equator and the North and South Pole, where it's cold. The equator is where it's the hottest. Hot air rises and migrates towards the poles, because that's what things do in nature. They go from hot to cold. They go from expansion to contraction. The Earth is spinning at 1,000 miles per hour, so at the equator. So that means that when the hot moist air is rising from the middle of the oceans on the equator, rising up into the air, it's being skewed off to the side because the Earth is spinning. So it's actually not just going straight up, it's swirling, and it's heading towards the poles in a a swirling spiral as the Earth spins towards the poles. And as it's heading towards the poles, it's creating whirls and eddy patterns and all kinds of complex turbulence, and that's what he's studying. It's very chaotic. It's and of course, as it goes towards the poles, things are getting cooler, and the hot, expanded, moist air is condensing. And as it condenses, it forms raindrops, and that falls as rain. And as it gets to the poles, it falls as snow. But the whole concept of weather patterns, and particularly now, you probably must have heard by now the concept of what's happening with the jet stream, and the stability of the weather patterns on Earth are becoming more and more unstable. We are progressing gradually towards a chaotic system in our environmental atmosphere, and weather patterns and ocean currents and heat and cold are shifting, getting weird, and that's causing titanic new forces of weather extremes throughout the planet because of climate change. All began here, chaos theory. The fact that chaotic systems have mathematical components that can describe them. And basically the idea is that whatever appears to be chaotic, if you can back away from it far enough, you see that it actually starts to conform to patterns, all according to this law of what's called entropy. Entropy is where things, everything in the universe tends to want to disseminate itself and expand itself out into ever more chaotic random patterns. So things that are like an apple that's solid will eventually rot and decompose into its component, parts of chemical compounds, which will go into the soil and get repurposed and rebuilt into other forms, which themselves will, because of the law of entropy, will disseminate and disintegrate and turn into their component parts and become fodder for the next cycle of something being built. We did discuss this in the past when we talked about the two great forces of the universe. One, entropy, which is taking things and breaking them into their component parts and dispersing them and making them more chaotic. And its counter force in the great yin-yang of things, which is the force of life itself, the self-assembling of component parts into structures like you and me, and trees and grass blades and everything else. The force of life is the great assembler of things, assembler the anti-chaotic forces of the universe, chaos and anti-chaos. Anti-chaos would be life itself forming things and constantly fighting against the forces of entropy that are trying to pull it apart. Life is pushing against that and assembling things together, even though entropy is trying to pull them apart at the same time. So life overcomes that, assembles things together into more and more complex, grandiose forms like multicellular organisms like you and me, and then maintains that in a constant state of pushback against entropy. And from the standpoint of psychology or consciousness, entropy there is experienced as laziness, as not wanting to get out of bed, not wanting to get your ass in gear, and not wanting to go to work, not wanting to do this or that. And from the grand traditions of the East, esoteric traditions, where the concept of, particularly with George Ivanovich Gurdjieff, who is the first mystic to come over in the 20s with all these secrets from monasteries and secret brotherhoods and all these esoteric secrets from the East repackaged for the Western mind. He brought over the concept of conscious effort and intentional suffering as a way of waking yourself up, which really means countering the force of entropy that wants to put you asleep, that wants your consciousness to go to its default lowest energy ground state of asleepness. And I'm not talking about physical sleep at night. I'm talking about becoming an automaton in your consciousness and not making any kind of an effort to realize that you are alive in the moment, that to wake yourself up to the fact that you're here, that you're breathing, that things are happening, that you are a witness out of your eyes. That takes a conscious effort. And if you never make that effort, then you sort of universe will bring you through entropy into your ground state of consciousness, which is about as asleep as you can be. And so the counterforce of that is a constant effort on your part to slap yourself and go, no, I'm asleep, I got to wake up. Now's a good time to realize that I'm here, that I'm alive. That kind of counterforce is what Gurdjieff was talking about, because it's conscious effort. I have to consciously do something to counteract my torpor and my entropy and my asleepness and my laziness. In order to overcome my laziness, I have to kick myself in the butt, right? And that's not comfortable. It's out of my comfort zone. That's the intentional suffering part. I'm going to intentionally make sure that I get up at 7 o'clock this morning with the alarm clock and go to the gym. Conscious effort, intentional suffering, from a spiritual standpoint, is the constant thing you have to do to counter the force of entropy that wants to put you permanently to sleep and essentially put you in the grave and disseminate you into your component parts. So going from a highly ordered to, increasing disordered state is what entropy is all about. And countering that and assembling these parts together, and countering the force of entropy and assembling them into something that gets work done, is the opposite of that. Back here in 525, the philosopher Heraclitus, in some of his philosophical treatises, actually indicated the first indications of the concept of chaos, without actually calling it that. But this is a good example. No man ever steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river, and he's not the same man. And this is the river of life. Every moment that goes by is a new moment, and I'm a different person. All the forces and factors to bear, the infinite number of factors and dynamics that are going on every second, every instant. All the planets are in a slightly different position. The day is a little bit longer. The temperature has fluctuated. My hormones are at a different place. Some of my cells, billions of my cells, have died and been replaced already. Every 7 years, my entire skeletal structure is missing and has been replaced with new bone cells. Not a single cell in my body is there after 7 years. They've all been replaced. I'm morphing all the time. I'm made of clouds that are disseminating and being replaced on a constant basis. I seem to persist, but it's an illusion. It's not real. But if you back up from the chaos far enough, the mathematics of chaos began to form patterns. And as Lorentz had discovered, formed something called a Lorentz attractor, which is there's a mathematical form, a higher order pattern of form that appears out of what appears to be chaos when you're in the chaos. But if you can get your perspective and back up far enough from the chaos, you see the chaos has form. The Lorentz attractor is a form of chaos that will eventually center itself and fade out. But there's another mathematical form called the strange attractor, where the strange attractor is continually and constantly changing and different and never the same twice. So it never reaches a stable higher order form of chaos. Chaos itself is chaotic, and the chaos of that constant renewed chaotic structure in itself is a form, and this is what that form looks like. Yeah. The strange attractor of Lorentz. And of course, this has been studied in unimaginable detail in science and physics, the nature of chaos. And the nature of chaos in the natural world, and the nature of chaos in the cosmos, and the nature of chaos in physics, and the nature of chaos in quantum physics, the nature of chaos in your own body and in your own mind, your own consciousness right this second is in a chaotic state. At one point, there was a friend of mine, Michael Hutchinson, who wrote a couple of profound books. The first book was called Mega Brain, back in the 80s, and that tipped off the whole scale of introducing high-tech methods for changing consciousness, brain entrainment, light and sound machines, all kinds of different devices. He's the first one who coalesced it all together in a book called Mega Brain, and followed up years later with a second book called Mega Brain Power. I was in those books. A whole picture of me with brown hair on my sound table. But he and I became friends, and he produced a newsletter every month called Mega Brain Chronicle or something like that. And there was an article in one of those with a new type of EEG device that he was discussing, where the EEG device was based on chaotic patterns in brainwaves. So it was a different way of looking at brain activity, which did not even involve beta, alpha, theta, delta, any of that stuff. It was all now gone. The chaotic patterns of electrical firings in the neurons, backed up far enough, formed strange attractors in the brain itself. And this appeared to me to immediately make sense that if you back up far enough, there are higher order patterns in brain activity swirling around various conscious states that form strange attractors of electromagnetic fields towards centers of conscious activity. One of the projects on my shelf is to rewrite an EEG program based on chaos and strange attractors. And I'm closer to that than ever now because of what's happened with the chaos of the pandemic and what it's forced everything to happen, and these live streams and my workshops online and all the rest. I mean, everything has shifted for all of us. And now it is bringing all these old friends and colleagues and people that I need to know, where we all are completing each other by the universe assembling us together. So the chaos is self-assembling into a form, into a higher form. And if it's happening for me, I know it's happening for you. So observe, check it out, look at your life, see where that's happening for you. Watch where the doors are opening and walk through them. When a butterfly flutters its wings in one part of the world, it can eventually cause a hurricane in another. That's where this whole thing came from, of the butterfly wing. Although the whole idea of the butterfly thing was sort of from old Zen stories. You know, whether the wing of the butterfly goes up or down changes all of reality, is through the furthest end of the universe, through the influence of resonance. Right, the wing goes up and down. It creates a wind pattern, and that wind pattern affects something. That affects something else, and that cascades out into everything, the whole universe. So it actually splits the universe in two. So if the wing goes up in one universe and it goes down in another, those universes will eventually cascade their effects to a point where they don't even resemble each other far enough down the line. But the whole concept of chaos and the butterfly and the influences, the minutiae influences, where the initial factor of whether the wing goes up or down changes everything, is very close to many things in physics that we see. And as we talked about once before, Stephen Wolfram and his book, this big thick book that I showed you, his whole concept of cosmology is based on initial conditions of a simple mathematical formula that formula starts to repeat itself out and forms everything in the universe that appears to be as it is for us. And that's what fractals are all about. Fractal mathematics is a slightest change in the initial mathematical formula begins to spin out completely different fractal looking forms. But as he was showing, that simple mathematical formulas in the beginning that spin out all of themselves form all the different familiar things that we see around us. Mountainscapes and planetary systems and lake tributaries and oceans and all of that stuff spins straight from fractal mathematics. And there was this computer program called Mojo World that I talked about. That was a computer program you could buy, and you could manipulate the initial mathematical factors and click a button and a whole planet would form. Mountains, snow peaks, waterways, river tributaries, clouds, all form all by itself straight from the fractal math, just spinning out. So, you know, sort of the butterfly wing, if it goes up or down. And here we are. I told you we'd be talking about the weather. Chaotic patterns of the jet stream. Here's the jet stream. Here's these whirls and eddies that form in the oceans. And all of those are formed around heat and cold signatures that form the trade winds and form the ocean currents. And the ocean currents blend together to form what's called the jet stream. The jet stream and all of this planetary dynamics have formed a state of equilibrium over the millennia. And mankind has been screwing around with, you know, emissions, carbon emissions and aerosols for 200 years now, and it's accumulated in the atmosphere and is changing weather patterns because it's changing the heat dynamics of the ocean, and the ocean drives the jet stream. And when the jet stream begins to become more chaotic and unstable, it dips way down into the United States, and we have polar vortices that are sucked down and create extreme cold, 50 below zero. I experienced it in Iowa when I was going to chiropractic school back in the late 70s. although this is part of a deeper issue called turbulence, which comes from chaotic systems and strange attractors, create turbulence, and turbulence is the most difficult thing to describe in mathematics. Extremely difficult because of all the different unimaginable layers of complexity. No mathematician would have enough lifetimes to do all the calculations to describe even the most minimal aspect of turbulence. We're starting to get into a place where we can begin to describe it now with the advent of bigger and better computers, and particularly with quantum computer. Quantum computing will be able to visualize turbulence for the first time in math. Chaotic systems. Usually turbulence, we think of this, the turbulence of air molecules, particularly around mountains and storm systems where the wind becomes chaotic and a plane gets buffeted by rattling and shaking and the turbulence in the air and the wind, turbulence in the ocean, turbulence in the water, how the water reacts in the ocean at large is a chaotic pattern. But when we back up far enough, we see that all these chaos patterns and the turbulence of the water sloshing is all according to higher mathematical principles that form their own strange attractors. But even our blood has turbulence, It's called Newtonian pipe flow turbulence. Fluids going down a pipe. And that's essentially what your blood is, blood fluid going down a pipe. Forms chaotic turbulence in the pipe. And we don't want turbulence, because when you get turbulence in your blood, you get blood factors showing up that form clots in the blood. The turbulence mechanism. Big whirls have little whirls that feed on their velocity, and little whirls have lesser whirls, and so on, to viscosity. Viscosity means it gets thicker. The blood is getting thicker and thicker and thicker. The more you have whirls and eddies and turbulence in the blood, has turbulence, whirls within whirls within whirls, banging up against the sides of the walls. And the mind-blowing thing is that in the body has solved the problems of turbulence in the blood. The turbulence mechanism works in conjunction with the capillary gate mechanism. It explains the nature of blood pressure, the palpable pulse, arterial sclerosis, or arterial thrombosis, blood clots. The key to understanding hemodynamic physiology, blood physiology, is the non-Newtonian nature of blood. Non-Newtonian means quantum nature of blood, which abolishes turbulence during systolic blood acceleration. Systolic means when the heart squeezes and the blood goes shooting down the arteries. Red cell aggregates form spontaneously during systolic blood acceleration and abolish systolic turbulence. And part of this is from the fact that the arterial walls are elastic and have tension, have sort of a muscle tension, so that as the blood goes down, it can expand and snap back. So something about the elasticity and contractibility of the arterial walls in combination with the red blood cells defeats turbulence. So the blood flows smoothly and has no turbulence. So life has figured out a way, even in the chaos, turbulence of possibility of our blood, to figure this problem out and fix it. Amazing. But back to the weather, more dangerous airplane turbulence possible due to global warming because of the increasing instability of the jet stream and the heat versus the cold interface, where turbulence arises at the borderline between where heat and cold fronts meet. It's going to make it more difficult to fly as global warming marches forward. 2 years ago, it was so hot in Arizona, it broke every record. It was the hottest it's ever been in Arizona. It was so hot that airplanes couldn't take off anymore because the dispersion of the air under extreme heat makes it impossible for lift to take place under the wings. So we couldn't fly our airplanes because it was too hot. Here's a perfect example of turbulence and chaos and strange attractors, the atmosphere of Jupiter. And Saturn looks similar. These incredible whirls and eddies and strange attractors and turbulence in a stable configuration if you're far enough away, because these bands of turbulence that are forming here are stable with the quiet bands, but there's eddies and turbulence and things like that going on. But the entire system has reached a level of stability that is obeying higher order math of chaos. Look at this one, Crab Nebula, classic example of turbulence in an astrophysical object, the highly turbulent supernova remnant Crab Nebula, explosion of a star. At the core of it all is something called quantum foam. And so what that means is, we're constantly using these larger and larger and larger atom smashers to, smash atoms apart so we can see what they're made of. So you smash an atom apart and protons, electrons, and neutrons fly out. And so you grab one of those and you smash that, and inside of a proton is, quarks and charms, and you smash those apart, and they're hadrons and leptons, and you smash those apart, and there's Z bosons, and you keep smashing and smashing, and smarter particles come out that you can open up, and eventually you get down to the core of the quantum field, and there's no new particles inside the particles, because you've reached a level of size that is the smallest of the smallest of the smallest that you can possibly have. And it's not smooth. It's in a state of vibration, forming standing waves. And the standing waves, when you look closer and closer and closer at the standing waves, it's not smooth. It's bubbles. They call it quantum foam. It's a hypothetical construct, but it's something called the Planck length, sort of the smallest length that you can possibly have. So here in the quantum foam field, it looks like bubbles, soap bubbles, or boiling water. Bubbles and bubbles and bubbles are arising and jostling and popping, and new bubbles are replacing them. And that's pretty much what the quantum foam looks like. Where the Planck length is, the smallest length that can possibly be measured. And that's where this concept of string theory happens. These vibrating strings are the Planck length strings. And why can nothing be smaller than the Planck length? Why couldn't there be half a Planck length, right? It's got to do with this photons and the electromagnetic effect of photons and the speed of light. That a photon, there's the Planck length and the Planck time. The shortest, sort of particle of time that you could possibly have is this sort of conundrum. It's like a yin-yang koan. What's the sound of one hand clapping? What's the Planck length and what's the Planck time? Well, the Planck time is the length of time it takes a photon to go from the beginning to the end of the Planck length. And the Planck length is the time it takes for a photon to go the Planck length. So they curl around each other. So if you can wrap your mind around that one, then good luck to you. It's you can't go smaller than the Planck length, because when you try to, you end up with a black hole. You end up with an infinitude. You end up with infinity, because you're smaller than a light particle can go. So since everything that we know in the universe is based on photons, except for what? You should know the answer to this, except for sound waves, except for pure energy moving through a medium at a certain frequency. The two is the yin and yang, electromagnetic and sound. So the electromagnetic universe of photons, of everything that appears to be what we think we are, breaks down at the Planck length, because smaller than the Planck length is smaller than the movement of a photon. So therefore everything disappears. And it disappears into infinity. So it becomes simultaneously a white hole, black hole at the same time, and it can't be measured anymore. So that's why the Planck length is sort of the smallest you can go mathematically. All because of this guy, Max Planck, who calculated the smallest measurement possible of space and time, Planck length and the Planck time. This is now a universal constant that everybody agrees on. But this concept of the Planck scale, the smallest of the small, where we have something, quantum foam, where particles are popping in and out of existence like boiling water in a pot. The bubbles that are popping up are transdimensional. They're popping into existence from another dimension and then popping and disappearing into another dimension in a scale of size and activity that's impossible to comprehend, to the largest possible scale that we can measure with the Hubble telescope, the furthest we can see into the universe and penetrate, the largest scales we can measure, to the smallest scales we can go to. Midway between all of that is life itself, you and me, here in the middle. So from the standpoint of quantum foam to the standpoint of the largest universal patterns, the galactic, the universal web of galaxies, which all start to assemble each other. They look like each other after a point. The smallest of the smallest of the small at the Planck length, and the largest of the large that you can possibly get to, obey the same rules and look the same. At the quantum foam level, things are popping in and out of existence and seem to be chaos and unstable. But as you back further and further and further away from that, they appear to assemble themselves into strange attractors that look like a quark and a charm and a hadron and a lepton and an atom and a person. So from that standpoint, you and I in this world represent the stable attractor of underlying chaos at a quantum field level. We are the solution. We are the mathematical, stable form that arises from chaos. Quantum foam, space is a vacuum and vacuums are empty, so space is empty. Well, that's not true. Down at the Planck length, which is this big number here, the smallest length we can see down to, space-time starts looking like a hallucination of someone tripping on massive amounts of acid. Stuff literally just pops into existence for a millionth of a fraction of a second and disappears. Black holes, wormholes, particles, and their antimatter analogs appear out of nothing and then collide with each other and annihilate baby universes, which our universe might have started off as. It turns out that down at the Planck length, the uncertainty principle allows energy to change into particles and their antiparticle analogs. Energy and matter freely pop back and forth into existence in the quantum foam state of the smallest of the smallest of the small in the quantum field. And of course, what is that? From the standpoint of the Vedas, it's consciousness itself, which is what the foam is. This popping in and out of existence in different dimensions. It's quality of consciousness itself at the deepest level of the collective unconscious mind. Consciousness may be the product of carefully balanced chaos. Brain scans reveal the importance of maximizing configurations among neurons, so it could be that consciousness itself is the universal solution to chaos, that at the core chaos organizes into attractors, which consciousness is the solution of. Chaos theory and consciousness. Consciousness remains one of the most bizarre phenomena in the universe. It's like a fundamental nature of consciousness could be quantum foam itself, all swirling around chaos theory and fractal mathematics. Why everything seems to reflect its image in everything else, boundless small and boundless large, reflected in ordering of brainwaves and consciousness. Brainwaves themselves, or organization of chaos into form, states of consciousness. The ultimate metaphysical secret, if we dare to state it so simply, is that there are no boundaries in the universe. Boundaries are illusions, products not of reality, but of the way we map and edit reality. And while it is fine to map out the territory, it is fatal to confuse the two. I will let go, and that will collapse it into a new possible outcome. So that's what we're trying to do with this. We're trying to align ourselves together to tip the quantum field to create a new reality than the one that we're currently in. A world that is more perfect and sort of more utopian. And before we can do that, we have to have an idea about what we wish that to be, because it's our force of consciousness and our concept of reality that forms reality itself. So the reality that we have right now, the one that we're experiencing in this world, is a collective, unconscious, communal construction that we're all agreeing on. We are creating the one that we've got, and if we don't like it, let's change it. And science now gives us the tools to make that happen. Combining what we currently have with the tools of science, which gives us a precision of looking into the brain and seeing what consciousness looks like in different states, and brain entrainment to entrain consciousness to any place we want it to go, means that we have, for the first time in history, the ability to use ancient practices with a precision that's never been possible, with aligning brainwaves and consciousness of large groups of people together, and have everyone center into what do we want. And the only viable solution to what do I want, because it can't come from small mind, it has to come from the biggest mind you can get in touch with. And the biggest mind you can get in touch with is the grandiose mind of the, infinite spirit, infinite godhood, whatever word you want to try to apply to that. The self-organizing principle of life itself has the answer to that. So in reality, if I can get to this place in myself where I stand at the brink of the next moment from now, and my picture of what the next moment is going to make that moment what it is, then it's best for me to surrender. I will let go. And that will collapse the whole thing into a new possible outcome, because I'm allowing the universe to move through me to create the next moment for now in its most perfect version of what it could be. The universe has a much better picture about what that could be than my small mind. Whatever we plant in our subconscious mind and nourish with repetition and emotion will one day become reality. Everything changes when you start to emit your own frequency rather than absorbing the frequencies around you. When you start imprinting your intent on the universe rather than receiving an imprint from existence. So we talked about this before, where once I begin to assemble what it is I want out of the universe, what I need to have as an experience, and I start to conceive that and flesh it out so it touches my emotions, I'm putting pressure on the universe. And it's a give and take. If I'm not doing that and I'm passive, the universe puts pressure on me. The universe will come up with, quote, random events that I then have to respond to. And for most people, that is your life. Your life is a series of responding to the things that happen to you at random from various things that happen in your world and in your life. But once you begin to center yourself and conceive of what do I want? What is my purpose? Why am I here? You start putting pressure on the universe when you start to conceive of what it is you want as an experience, and the universe becomes passive. You become the active force, and the universe begins to conform to your idea, and the universe begins to change. And there's power in numbers. The more people we can assemble together with a grandiose pressure, the more the universe responds quicker and more powerfully. That's what these live streams are essentially all about and trying to accomplish. So once we can do that and we put pressure on the universe, this pressure begins to shift things. Things will begin to shift in your own life and the lives of those people that you know. Eventually you'll see it in the news. The world at large will begin to conform. It all begins to become one thing after a while. You meld, you melt, you emerge into the universe. You and the universe become indistinguishable. Your consciousness itself is putting pressure and aligning with the highest principles that the universal vibration is trying to emit. You synchronize up with that, and then it all manifests by itself. For us to conceive an idea and flesh it with emotion, deposits that idea into the universe, and the universe conforms to it. Things begin to respond. Things begin to flesh out. Things start happening all of their own, and then you know it's right. When the doors start opening, the people start showing up. It all assembles itself around you in an inscrutable way that you could never have knocked on enough doors and made enough phone calls to make that happen. That's when it's right. That's when you know that those are the doors you walk through. So with that said, that's where we're going right now with our soundtrack. Bringing chaos into form with sound and entrainment. So headphones, please. So relax and take a big breath and close your eyes, and here we go. here's where you can get that soundtrack. I'd just like to say once again, I haven't said it in a while, but I'd like to profoundly thank everyone for being here together and following my crazy rantings week after week after week. It's a joy and a pleasure and an honor to be here with you. Thank you for being here. Take care of yourselves. Have joyful time. Be healthy. Take care of yourself until the next time we come together, which is next Sunday. So until then, we'll see you.